Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast, Evidence Matters, where I, Jerry Bui, am co-hosting with the luminary, Steve Davis. We do have a special guest today that we'll introduce in a second, but we did want to touch on the entire concept of the end-to-end workflow because as forensic examiners and being the tip of the spear or in the front of that workflow where we collect data, not just traditional run of the mill ESI data, but we're often asked to do is tackle the newfangled new frontier of data, which is occurring at greater frequency and at greater speed every single day as data sources are considered as evidence within our very important eDiscovery litigation investigation and regulatory response matters. But what you should be looking for in an organization is the ability for those forensics folks to be able to hand off those collections to someone that can handle it and help dovetail it into a common and stable e-discovery workflow. There is a crucial step in that process, a handoff, if you will. And Steve, this is where I want to hand it off to you because you're so good at these analogies or metaphors. And what do you liken this process to and the role of that glue that ties the collection to the rest of the downstream workflow?
Yeah, I'm good at it because I'm kind of sophomoric. So if you're not very bright, you can speak to the common man pretty well. So I tend to do okay there. As you know, Jerry and I have spoken before on podcasts, and everyone knows I love streaming stuff and watching. So literally, we were just watching this past week The Bear. If you haven't watched it before, The Bear is one about, and I'm from Chicago, so Italian beef is in my blood, literally. And The Bear is a show with Jeremy Allen White and a series of other people about running a kitchen. And the analogy to me when Jerry first brought it up to me was this idea of, they always talk about too many chefs in the kitchen. But in this show, in this 8 series or this 8 episode series they're doing right now, they kind of selected a chef de cuisine. And I think of the chef de cuisine as what Mike Johnson and Joe and the other people in side data solutions do for us. Jerry and I are part of a club, not a cult, but just a club of kind of forensics. And sometimes we feel like we're on an island, but I really feel like the brethren or the kin to us is really data solutions. We speak similar languages. We understand technologically what we're up against and what really the beauty of not just our company, but companies that embrace the uniqueness of data solutions and the fact that you've got to normalize and parse and deal with abstract document types and file formats. And I know everyone, lawyers who are very brilliant will sit down and say, that's all fascinating, get me to the finish line faster. And this is where data solutions or that unique person that can tie things together in a kitchen or in an e-discovery company matters, and it's worth its weight in gold, literally. So I gave you lots of accolades there, Mike, but maybe just talk a little bit about, I know, we could pick any topic and we could go through 20-25 minutes, on one item, but give me maybe a couple of the top things that you deal with day in, day out, you and your colleagues in the data solutions department that are maybe the most challenging.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys, as your first guest on your podcast with you industry legends. But so take it easy on me a little bit. But um, yeah, so just real quick, I'm on the data solutions here at Purpose Legal, as you guys said, and I often find myself as that bridge between forensics and downstream workflows, which is kind of a gray area at a lot of places. I tend to find myself working at those kind of difficult edges of processing and ingestion, taking the messy data types that don't fit cleanly into legacy workflows and figuring out how to uh, make them reviewable and usable for reviewers downstream in production, etc. Um, Recently, I've spent a ton of time and effort focused on the solving for the modern attachment problem that is, of course, just buzzy in the industry right now, which is also a constant moving target, as you know, is every time you think you figured something out, something changes or Microsoft changes something, or it's just always moving and always shifting, and we're trying to, at least when we can, keep pace and maybe even sometimes stay a step ahead. Um,
Yeah, you mentioned Michael, Microsoft,
yeah,
and I think you're alluding to Microsoft 365, the enterprise cloud platform. That's been around for a long time. Why is it still a pretty significant struggle for a lot of our clients to understand, consult, or advise and deal with this concept? What do you think the main reasons are for any outstanding misunderstandings or problems and complications, failures in the modern attachment workflow as we extract them from M365 and try to rationalize them into a document review workflow? It changes. Is it due to like a major shift at all? I know there was a major change in August of 2025, and
right.
there's tweaks here and there.
Yeah.
And you said you try to keep pace or stay one step ahead. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, having it's like the scientific process, right? You see an update, you test before just saying, okay, this update is gonna work. We know it's gonna work, right? It's almost not trusting everything all the time, and taking it and saying, all right, so here's the update, but let's test, let's export, let's observe, let's change this variable, but let's keep these constant. It really is, the way I approach um testing new data sources and new updates is very scientific in a way, following those processes and really scrutinizing and analyzing the results, noticing things, of course, and noticing differences, and trying to, and when an issue comes up, trying to figure out, trace back what that issue is. um yes, the newest Purview update you mentioned in August, it did introduce some efficiencies, as you know, mainly the one being able to export without going to a review set, but doing direct exports. Um, for us in our workflow internally, it helps our workflows because of differences between what a review set is, which kind of pushing to a review set processes the data in a way, it extracts attachments, it extracts containers, etc., causes more of a data explosion than just going from the query, direct from the query itself. So for us, that was an improvement. At the same time, all of the CSVs that we were used to working with, the field names, the order of those fields, you get so used to seeing things, repeatedly for a year or two or 6 months, whatever they give you, and you get used to going to the same, column DG, let's say. It's weird how these things get so stuck in your mind and suddenly they change it. And tools which are, you know, built around locations and field names and things like that all need to change accordingly, right? Workflows need to change. So those are the kinds of things trying to keep up with. And as soon as you get there, like I said, it seems like there's something around the corner, right? There's always something, and not just with Purview. We're looking at
And
relativity collect and other options like that as well.
you're not working with production data when you're doing experiments. Obviously you have a sandbox that you're working with, right?
Right.
How is it important is it for an organization like ours and others in the industry to have a sandbox and do very scientific experiments so
Yeah.
that you can be crisp and clear with your answers to the client when they have questions?
Exactly. I'm in a position where I'm trusted and I've been given access to the things I need to do the work I need to do. It's having that kind of open ability and trust to go out there and test what I need to do and have access to almost every backend tool and system I need to do is invaluable. Absolutely. And Purpose has given me that. So I can get in there in Purview. I can generate test data. I can do PowerShell scripts to test legal hold behavior, and I'm able to get in and do what I need to do, and I'm supported and enabled in that way, which is a total game changer.
Yeah. And I would say that it's a little counterintuitive because we're a little bit of a fast food restaurant. I mean, people wheel up with their latest case. They want it done right away. You can't go to a lawyer and tell them, hey, try my case faster. But they will in eDiscovery come to you and say, I want data collected, parsed, normalized, and you pick the best tool to get it done. And I need that yesterday, by noon. And so it's a little weird or counterintuitive, like I said, for a data solutions area to be afforded the opportunity to do empirical testing. And I mean, you're talking to three guys that all three of us come from that science background. I mean, all of us love that. And
Hmm.
to me, whenever people say anything, I'm like, show me Missouri, right? Prove it and empirically prove that that's the way it works. We get a lot of people in the e-discovery industry that get out over their skis and start saying things or repeating things or even hearing a podcast like this and just regurgitating what they heard. And it's kind of comforting, but it's also probably a little scary because you have a day job, right? You got to be producing stuff day in and day out. So it's kind of a unique thing to be afforded the opportunity, not just for a sandbox, but also have the time to underwrite and develop decision making around
Hmm.
what is truly the best. You talked about modern attachments the other day. There used to be the plugin FEC, right, that dealt with all the Google Workspace and Google Suite before that. But now, isn't that also one of the tools we can utilize along with several others to deal with the M365 ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely, it is. And FEC is a great one. We really like it on for the data solutions team. So much again of what we're trying to do is bridge that gap, the forensics to processing review gap, which is to make sure we're getting the format that works best for us, which is difficult. And having that experience downstream to understand what needs to be done upstream, right? And that's again that unique position I'm in. But yes, FEC puts it in a format that makes things easier for us. It's difficult enough to deal with modern attachments, but FEC is great. Um, we've also recently, I guess, we're still in the midst of developing and vetting and putting it through its paces, but we're working also on a custom tool internally to take Purview exports in their native format. And then of course the versioning question, which I might have alluded to earlier. That's kind of the next layer, right? That's whatever you start talking about modern attachments, and suddenly someone is going to ask about versions, and a lot of people when you talk to them, they're assuming they're getting the contemporaneous version a lot of times, and we have to educate them right on the that it's not or it is depending on the tool and things like that. So that is also definitely part of our thought process as we're going about this new tool as well, because we'd love to
That
solve for
Yeah,
that.
that's a big one. And Jerry and
Yeah.
I have both, been besides podcasts. The reason we were allowed to be doing podcasts, we've been sitting on stands for many years of our lives doing testimony, and people will gotcha right about whatever issue they can. They'll argue about facts, they'll argue about law, they'll argue about process, whatever. And when it comes, this is a huge one, versioning.
Mm.
But as investigators, Jerry and I, it may be about a contract document that existed in 2020, and it mattered how that document existed. Yeah, a lot of times those documents are static and they never change, but a lot of times they're collaborative and dynamic and they do change. And so I would argue that it's not, you know, absolutely acceptable to just take the latest version unless you understand all the track changes that have occurred over time, or you can revisit. And so that's a great one because I know there's not an easy answer for every platform in terms of going back 4 or 5 years to when the actual dissemination of the information occurred. what how do you deal with that? Let's say it's an investigation, you need to go back 4 or 5 years. Does that render some of the tools useless or lesser?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the perfect use case. We're actually in the midst of consulting and collecting for a case for that exact reason. I mean, frequently, as you know, the advice when it comes to versioning in Purview, because of the explosion of data versions, commonly we end up with the current version, right? But there's times like the contract disputes where it's not an option. That is, it's needed. We need to find that version, and we need to get all of them. So yeah, it depends on the use case. And targeting that version is custom, and it's, if things like retention policies, clients can, Jerry, as you know, they can set certain retention policies in Purview, but it all has to be proactive, ahead of the game, which 5 years ago, no one turned on that setting, and you need that version from 5 years ago. You're going to have to find it a different way, right? So, yeah, it's a case by case, and it's one of those things to talk through, and it's definitely exciting, and that is a lot of what we're thinking about these days is trying to get that one. That's what everyone wants, right? That is what people want. If there's one version they want, it is the contemporaneous version.
And you mentioned exciting. I think that's the right attitude for us here on this podcast, is that we look at these challenges as exciting. And so you got to have an optimistic, positive attitude when you're dealing with this sort of thing, and not a defeatist one. And you mentioned like the perfect use case, but not everything's perfect, right? It's kind of mixed use cases. And you mentioned talking things through. That implies a consultative attitude. And Steve, how great is it to have someone like Mike be able to join our client calls early, which we often
Yeah.
do. We include Mike on these early stage calls so that we can talk through these issues, because even though there's case law, even though there's industry best practice, what always matters is what are the needs of the case and what have parties negotiated. And so there's all these input variables into what the right size solution is. So if we have Purview exports and we can massage those things manually as we do through various scripts, or we're working on automating that. We have FEC, forensic email collector from Metaspike, as an option. We have Rel Collect as an option. And of those templated workflows, those solutions that we've vetted, the input variables dictate which one would be the optimal solution. So the consultation really matters. How valuable is it, Steve? Because I know you do a lot of these sales consultations. To have a sales engineer like Mike available for these calls.
Well, I think it's a tremendous point, and I think we're very blessed. All of us. It's funny when you think about, going back 20, 25 years in our careers, and you think of the dichotomy between people that are allegedly salespeople that, talk a lot, and sometimes we get bucketized, if that was a word up there. And sometimes then there's the hyper technical people that understand parsing and normalization, structured data exports, and things like that. And so typically those are people that you find in a cave, right? And they don't, communicate, or they don't come out for sunlight. But what we have done here is kind of bridge the gap. And I think one of the beauties, and the reason I do think we have positivity and we enjoy what we do, Mike's a good dude. I mean, Jerry's a good dude. These are people that when you get on the phone, we can speak technically with people, but we also kind of tear down some of the inherent defenses that occur. Because you know what I love, and I know Jerry loves, and Mike's the same, cut out of the same cloth, is that we're problem solvers. We love problem, and people that are scientists that I love equations. I used to get excited about math tests. People think I'm an idiot. That's okay. But I did. I love that stuff because I like testing what I do and whether I understood and could come back later. And I think that's where Mike tears down defenses, and the entire data solution staff. I mean, the other people on that staff as well. You can get them on the phone. They're not speaking a different language. It's not Greek to the end user or the client that's listening to it. And they're interested and they want to solve a problem. So bridging the gap between what sales rhetoric can be and then hyper technical hyperbole can be, and bridging those together so you have someone that understands challenges but can communicate with people and understand getting to a goal line or an end result. I think it's huge. And I think it's why this is kind of a free flowing convo, is that, that's how we kind of deal with each other on cases, is the same way we kind of communicate on these podcasts.
Yeah, and there's not been a single call where the client has not had an aha or eureka moment from Mike being on there and explaining things in a very crystal clear way. That's just really telling on the impact that Mike and the rest of the data solutions team has. And Mike, I have another question for you. I know that there's some days, since you've been so heavily steeped in solving for M365 issues, and crafting solutions. I know there's days where you feel like, am I going to spend the rest of my life with Microsoft Purview? What else are you solving
That's
for
funny.
as part of your to-do list and
Yeah.
the rest of the department's to-do list? What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing that are important to clients, and what is like the other very uh, important priority for clients that you see solving for in the near future?
Um, to answer your question, what else is out there? Well, chat data, I think we briefly touched on that at the beginning, but that's evolving and rapidly changing, and we've got project management platforms, and we've got collaboration platforms, and we've got chat data sources seeming to pop up every day, Telegram and WhatsApp and all this other stuff. Or Notion AI, that's another one. Everything. Chatbot, AI chatbots, of course, is huge. Data's being generated everywhere outside of email, it seems like. So that seems to be the other thing that, is constantly changing, and we're constantly testing and trying to figure out what artifacts from these tools are you got, your team, specifically forensics, what's available, what can we get, and with that, how do we turn it into something that's usable at the end, right? And that's something that we're always trying to keep up with. A lot of it we do that, like I said, we try to stay ahead of it, but every day you might get a new thing on one day and you got to figure it out, right? And that's again back to what's great is we have the ability to test, and we have a lot of communication with you guys, and testing outputs and everything like that. So um yeah, I would say chat data. I'm trying to think of something else that's just forefront right now. Can you think of anything?
I
Yeah,
mean,
what
I
it,
mean, obviously, I was going to say that, the third party app that you're talking about and you allude to with chat data. I always say a phone is not a phone is not a phone. Like they say the old saying from Gertrude Stein, a rose is a rose is a rose. Well, we all know that a phone's not a phone. And when a client comes to us and says, can you do this? The first question and I heard you say it earlier in the podcast, is it depends, right? Jerry and I have beaten that phrase to death over the years using it, because it does depend. And it matters whether it's an Android, and it matters whether it's from iOS, and it matters what the flavor of the third party app, and is that encrypted data? Is it ephemeral data, right? Does it still exist? Is it synced or backed up somewhere else? So I know that whole category of information you got to have, I was thinking while you were speaking, eyes wide open, right? You got to have your eyes wide open. You got to be, when you're 15 years old and we're teaching the kids how to drive, it's not just what's in front of you, what's on the side, and then what's in back, and then again check that one to the right, and then make sure the animal hasn't run out in the road. And I mean, there's so many different things going on. It kind of feels like that's what you're up against every morning. Does the API work today,
Hmm.
right? Oh, did they disengage that where it's not? Or you used to be able to get 1 year's data out of WhatsApp utilizing a off the shelf tool, and then, you know what, not today. So I think that's the type of flexibility that we talked about that you've got to have to succeed in your role.
Absolutely.
yeah, chats with real people and chats with AI are definitely on the forefront. I'm seeing a lot of ChatGPT and Claude
Hmm.
artifacts being collected and analyzed and wanting answers on that front, because so many knowledge workers are relying on that. But maybe to shift the lens or the microscope a little bit here, are you using AI for for your own work? Has it helped you solve these problems? And I know you're careful about feeding it any kind of client data. That's a big no-no. But in general, in terms of like building utilities or workflows or solving code, is it actually accelerating that process so that we can keep pace with handling the data and transforming it to something that fits into what you call the legacy workflow?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We're not avoidant, that's for sure, of AI. It to an extent, uh, yes, for certain coding, you know, it is being used, something like Claude, to help with that. But fortunately, I'm here, but I have my team, and specifically um, Kevin Harm on my team, who has a lot of previous coding experience, which I'm fortunate to work with him on. He knows most of that, fortunately. But yes, I think there's a little bit of use, yes, to assist in those ways. But outside of that, we try to rely on internal skill set, but as much as possible. But yeah, when needed, absolutely, we will tap that as a resource.
Great. Yep. You're not scared of technology because you have to
Right,
confront it every single day.
exactly.
Jerry and I, in part, like what we do is we want serial work. In other words, we're out there and we want to become known to be problem solvers
Hmm.
because we want people to come back, right? We hate to kill our clients, do a job, and they're like, thanks, hope I never see you again, right? You want to be able to work with people so that they do come back again and again. What can people that are out there that are client facing day in and day out, how do we help you and the people in data solutions do their job better? Like maybe where do we fall short, or maybe where do we excel or at least meet your expectations? Like what can people in our roles that are client facing all the time do to kind of help you?
Yeah, got it. Yeah, exactly. You guys are the first point of contact frequently, right? And not only you, but your forensics teams who's doing the collections. I think making sure when someone on my team or myself is kind of looped in as early as possible, especially with new data types and unknown things of how things are uh, going to turn out in the end, and what are we going to be looking at the end. I think understanding and not assuming um, what the client says, or assuming what the output is going to be, or saying, let's just, instead of trying to isolate exactly what's needed and saying, you know what, let's get it all. Let's get it all right. Let's throw it there, and data solutions is magic, and they wave their wand at it, and suddenly the data's fine, right? I think being more, at times, more targeted and strategic, and I know that is a focus of your guys's, but just making sure, we get what we need and nothing more when possible, and making sure that downstream this will be the best for the client, and ultimately, for productions and defensibility overall. So I think just communication and consulting, right? That's the takeaway, is just staying in touch, um, communicating, and not assuming.
Thanks a lot, Mike. You are an absolute superstar, Purpose Legal, and we enjoyed interviewing you for the show today. So really appreciate the participation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and especially big thanks to you, Mike, for joining us as our guest star on the podcast. And do look out for our next upcoming episode. Evidence Matters is available on all your favorite podcast platforms. So please look at the show notes, look at the links. And on behalf of Steve Davis and I, your co-host for Evidence Matters, goodbye and good day.